Hello, welcome. This is a rabbit hole. I'm your host, Ben Wooten.
Hey, I'm Ashley.
And well, we were just talking about stuff. Oh, and I guess more about friendship, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
you were the one I think the ball was in your court. So why don't you just
I can't remember now. Something about
lead us off?
um
Time,
oh
impression.
yeah, like basically it takes time to form friendships, but I think the best way to look at it at the beginning at least um is kind of like I know I've talked about this a lot, but I look at the world in this lens, but like as an investment, um, kind of put time. You have to put time into it. It takes time to get to know people, and time is one of our non-renewable resources, if you will, that we have to spend. We everyone, only has so much time, but you have to spend that time to for with experiences with friends to kind of get to know them on a different level. Um, but I think that's one thing it's interesting is what makes you feel close to somebody, like the bond of a friendship or just any relationship. Like because to time definitely is a factor. So we like to call that quantity time, just the pure just quantity and quality time. I think experiences.
Shared
Great
experiences.
experiences, but then some experiences are better than others. We have, I think, the
Yeah.
ones where you're both CS. I think I already said this too, but C.S. Lewis had in I think it's the Four Loves. Have you read that one yet?
No, I haven't. I think I still have your copy of it though.
That's probably one of my favorites out of that collection. That and Mere Christianity. But he has so many really good analogies. He's just like a king of metaphors and analogies to explain the concepts he's talking about. And then one of them he talked. I wish I had the book on me right now so I could look back and say it exactly. But he had basically talking about friendship in a lot of the ancient literature was much more prized. It was much more of a thing that was valued, like just a brotherly friendship between two people. Like talked about David and Jonathan in the Bible, and a lot of people want friends, but they just want a friend. But it's he compared it to if lovers are looking at each other, the two friends are kind of looking forward, walking side by side. So like you kind of have a goal or a common interest or something that you're looking forward look doing, and you're walking towards it with somebody as a friendship, if that makes sense. It's kind of hard. He does a yeah, I'm just butchering it because he does such a better job. um, but yeah, that I think that's the friendship factor is pretty cool. And what does it take to form a good bond with somebody? Time is huge. Common interests are huge, and then basically finding people on your journey of whatever you're interested in. I feel like is usually the deepest relationships I've formed. Instead of looking for friends, you're on a mission or a goal, and then you find people in that are
Along the way.
along the way.
I think um positive experiences are huge, like big positive memories that you have together. Um, but I also think that there's something to be said about negative experiences, or even if it's not necessarily a shared experience, but just friends who are there for you if you're going through a hard time. I think that's a big one. Is that becomes a whole new level of accountability and someone you can depend on. And I think it also requires a lot of compassion. So for me, at least, I'm thinking right now of a specific friend who just has like time and time, thick and thin, been there with me, and it's so meaningful because you kind of know. And also, I think it makes you. I think it's kind of like this. snowball effect where the more they're there, the more likely you are to share with them, and then they're there again, and the cycle just keeps kind of perpetuating.
Mm,
And I know for like, I don't know, I think it just, with this friend in particular that I'm thinking of, who to me embodies everything of true friendship. Like, just is the walking meaning of friendship. Um, I'm thinking about, what does she do? Like, what makes her so special as a friend? And it's her dependability, and it's her, I think it's also her passion in a lot of ways, like how much she cares. And I think it's also people who are encouraging, but who are also, honesty is a big one. Um, but I don't know, then it makes you wonder, like, why do you have it with some people and not with others? And why did we evolve to this? Like, we just met as lab partners at NC State, sat down, hey, I'm Ashley. Hey, I'm, and it was, we were working on a shared assignment together, and we just kind of started talking like, oh, hey, I'm pre-med. Oh, wait, I'm pre-med. So I think that's a huge foot in the door, kind of like, we have shared interests and shared desires, and this is somebody that gets it and gets the struggle of being in, embodying a pre-med identity. And what does that mean? Like, the classes and the MCAT and shadowing hours and everything that goes into being a successful medical school candidate. So I think that's a big foot in the door. But, at the same time, like, I've met tons of other pre-med students, and we didn't necessarily click. So then I think it goes into other deeper things. But yeah, I still can't totally put my finger on it, but there's something there. And the chemistry expression, like, you just have chemistry, which, but then what is chemistry? What is that?
vibes.
Energy,
Good vibrations.
auras. But I think that there is something about it that has to be true. But I don't know what it is or how to explain it, which is probably why we just call it good vibes. And
Yeah,
these things that are really elusive, that we're like, yeah, it's something, we don't really get it, but you know what I'm talking about.
yeah. I like I think a lot of it has, or the phrase fully known and fully loved is used a lot in the I guess a lot of the church circles I'm a part of, but basically saying we want to be loved, but we also want to be known too. So you'll have like the balance of needing to open yourself up to all of your faults, to all of your flaws, and then people still loving you through that, and helping you and building you up through your, when they know all of your downfalls and your faults. And the more somebody gets to know you, the more they're going to find your flaws, and they love, it's just like basically in spite of your humanness that you've opened up to, or they've seen over time, that they'll still, um, be there for you, and I think that one of the downsides about, if a friendship that's only following a common interest, is there is no sacrifice.
Hmm.
And it's like, who's good, well, Kanye said it, when crap hits the fan, are you still a fan? What happens when things go wrong? Are you still going to be there? And I think that that's a good test of a friendship, is, when things aren't going smoothly and it's not fun, you're still going to be there. And I think that's why some people have a lot of friends, is they are willing to be selfless, and they're willing to sacrifice and help people out regardless of if it's beneficial to them. They're just like a giving person. Um, that's pretty. I don't know. I'm thinking of. I don't know. Did you ever meet Brian Munoz?
Mm-mm.
We went on the road trip together.
Oh, okay. No, I don't think so.
But yeah, he's probably one of the. He's like a classic example of that. Just when he says something, like like he's willing to follow through, like complete, like it, like I'll like casually say
Yes.
something like, "Yo, we need to get some pine needles for our house," and he's like, "Oh, my dad's got pine needles at his house, like, 'cause he's a landscaper, But you want me to give it to you? Or like, no, it's like, no, seriously. I'll call him. Like it's not a lot. I think, and I catch myself doing this too. But kind of the lighthearted, like, yeah, just let me know if you need help. But you know good and well that you didn't say it strong enough to where they're actually going to ask for help. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Like you're saying that's what you do?
yeah, well, it's like I genuinely will help out, but I just know from the way I said it that they're probably not going to ask for help.
Like you
So,
say with a little bit like there's gonna be a little bit of it's not pushback, that's not the
yeah,
right
you
word,
know what I
but
mean? Like when you're genuine, like if they asked you for help, you would help them. But it's
yeah,
not like you're like Brian would make it feel like, like, dude, why would you not ask for help? Like,
yeah,
yeah. And so that small
exactly.
thing is like crucial because he would you knew he meant it and he was willing to go out of his way.
Yes.
And it made me realize like, oh gosh, like a lot of times when I, say like, yeah, and if you ever need anything, just let me know. Which it's true. Like if you ever need something, you could let me know and I'd help out. But chances are that you're really encouraging that behavior um is low. So like I don't know. It's an interesting thing that I'm because you're not because it's not a bad thing to phrase things the way I phrase them, but you're also not making it very you're not making I'm not making it as clear that I would help, like crystal clear. Brian makes it like crystal clear, like, hey, if you need something, I got you. If
Yeah.
you need it, and it's like it's a weird thing, but I think that's why he's such a good friend. And we usually pick up back where we left off because he's that type of person. So I think that's a really interesting thing that I could be cognizant of is, you know, first of all, am I willing to actually sacrifice my own free time in this for if someone needs help? And then how can I convey that clearly to where, I am more reliable. And this is more just talking. I haven't really implemented this into my life yet, but it's just something that I'm thinking about. And that Brian does. It's more of a compliment to Brian and just seeing how well he does it.
It's super interesting that what you're saying because this is also true for my friend. Like what you're saying, I'm in my head like yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's like
Awesome. It's
she
inspiring.
she says something and I'm like, I know that you're 100% all in. That she's like, Ashley, I would drive to the end of the earth for you. And I'm like, yes, I know you would. And not in like a narcissistic, arrogant way, but I'm like, I believe you when you say that. Um, and I'm kind of with you on like it's not that I wouldn't do these things for select people. And maybe it just comes back to, well, it's interesting though, because she and I are kind of like yin and yang a little bit. Like in ways that I'm open, she's more closed off, and in ways that she's closed off, I'm more open. And I'm more reserved, kind of like what we talked about maybe being a little bit more hesitant to like receive or give those types of things. Like not that we're not willing, but there's just more of the like pause. There's not just the like seamless playthrough.
Mhm, mhm.
And I'm kind of wondering if like this is almost an example of that. But then on the flip side, she is way more like reserved than I am when it comes to other things. And I think it's interesting maybe just how people convey. I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly. But yeah, it's really interesting and kind of everything that you're saying is checking out and aligning for
I think some of it is that some people are not going to ask for help. They're just not that type of person to ask for help. So it's like the goal. It's almost like you could make it a goal to make it so easy to ask for help, where they're like they're actually willing to ask for help. But that's thinking a little too much. I think where it's like trying to bait somebody to give an answer or get a response. But I don't
so
know.
then what I'm thinking of now, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Good.
But what I'm thinking of now is like, the phrase opposites attract. Um, like just how opposite though, and what do you think that actually means, or how does that actually play out in terms of a relationship?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, you have two opposites, masculine, feminine. They're not opposites, but you know,
Synergistic.
synergistic, if you will. Um, I don't know. Opposites attract in regards to like the the role of a romantic relationship or a regular relationship, just like with friends. I think
I think anything. I don't.
I always like the seeing the like the movies or the TV shows or the video games where there's like the friend group that is perfectly balanced. It's like the for some reason I'm thinking of Sly Cooper. I've never even played that video game before, but it has it's like a spy movie or it's like spy it's any of the spy movies where they've got the researcher that does all the research and they've got the coder and they've got the strong guy that busts through stuff and they've got it's like a team or like a unit and they all play their perfect roles and everyone complements each other well. So you got the thinkers, you got the implementers. Um, and so I know with some of my friends, um, like specifically, did you meet Frank? Maybe you did. Maybe not.
I think in passing once, yeah.
Well, anyway, I think we're pretty good at complementary. And same with Dave. I think me and Dave work really well together. So I can speak on a personal note of just some of the things that I've noticed is so I tend to think more and get and make it's hard for me to transition it as more so into the action phase because I like to staying in the research and just maybe a little bit more information to make a better decision. And my tendency is to postpone decisions when I should have made a decision already. Um, that's my tendency. And then Frank is just like, well, let's just do it. Like
Yeah.
we've already got enough information, so that's a really good combination because we balance each other out in that way. Um, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a way that me and Dave are opposites that work out. Um, I think some people like planning and not planning. That like the spontaneity and the planning. That's a good balance between people. So you have some people that love to fly off the seat of their pants and just kind of live in the moment and do things, and then you have people that are the planners, which you need both. That's a really good opposites combination, I think, because they both push each other and they usually meet in the middle. That's probably the a more optimal place. Um, I think any of my other relationships. Um, for me, usually the people that are a little bit more action oriented kind of break me out of like staying in the thinking phase. So that's just so fun. It's so fun for me to come up with all these different things, but then actually doing them in the real world, it's nice to have people that are just like, all right, well, let's just go and do it. Um, but it also depends on who I'm with because if I'm with certain people, then it's like like the roles can switch depending on who I'm with too. So that's different people.
Yeah, like you're even more of a no, I think I know what you're talking about where you kind of become the person who usually you find your opposite in, but then if someone's even on a more extreme than you are, you kind of become.
Yeah, it's kind of like whenever, and this happens. I think thinking of the Weinstein brothers, Brett and Eric Weinstein. One of them's a biologist, and one of them's like a mathematician or something. Um, but anyway, They're both really smart, but they're slightly odd. And like, but when one of them left, so he moved to college or whatever. The other one's personality was able to I guess expand or become more into its own because they already had their roles, and so a part of the younger brothers was being a little suppressed, um, and how when certain roles disappear, people that were playing another role step up into another one, which is, I guess, the whole point of a hierarchy of like a job. When you realize that the buck stops at you, you kind of change and you have to adapt to the role that you're playing in the system. Like, okay, well, no one knows better than me to make the decision, so I got to start making decisions and I've got to start doing this and that. And
Yeah, or yeah, like you get forced into the role. Another thing that you were kind of just talking about is being forced into a role in a way. Like for me, something just came to mind. I know I reference it a lot, but I just really think that Jamie and Claire's relationship hits on so many important things
And Outlanders.
in Outlander, and I learned so
Okay.
much from them. And I'm I don't remember the exact quote, but kind of they're talking and um Jamie is kind of having a weaker moment and Claire's like, "You don't get to be weak right now. I'm the weak one and both of us can't be weak at the same time," or something like that. And I think that that's a really cool kind of philosophy that like you've got to have one that's solid. And even if like you're your strong is usually like I'm thinking of kind of a I don't know, maybe a number line, if you will, and kind of like 0 is neutral, and then you've got strong and you've got weak. And maybe if like you're both in the weak zone, someone's still got to be a little bit stronger than the other person for it to work. And and then being forced into that role, or then if you're really going through a hard time, I think it helps to kind of have a role that you've got to do. And I'm thinking of how that actually played out in my own life when I was like, last year super hard, all of the loss in my family, and kind of having like a okay, well, I'm making these decisions and I'm doing this and I'm writing the obituary and I'm selecting this and I'm putting this together. Like I think it helps to have a role that you can step into, but it's also helpful when those roles kind of get a little blurry. And I think then that's when there maybe it's that there aren't really boundaries and so you can explore a little bit more. I don't know.
The thing you said about being strong and weak, I think it was a Brene Brown thing I've heard. Some interview I saw of, I think it was Brene Brown, but she talked about how, she had it in percentages. So, if someone's at 20%, you know, then the other person needs to pick up the 80%. And so you communicate that like, hey, I'm at 30% today. Can you pick up the extra, whatever. So it's kind of like you're more team oriented and basically saying, here's where I'm at. Can you pick up the rest? And that way well communicated. I think it's a good way to communicate of your what you've got in the tank.
I think that's so beautiful and so important, especially if you're in a relationship where you're trying to come together as a united front. Like I'm thinking mostly of a marriage and or even just a really close friendship. Um and I think that when you go through something challenging or traumatic, like there's kind of that natural understanding like oh, this person is probably going to be a little bit lower, so I need to be a little bit more giving to kind of get them back up.
Hmm.
And I think that maybe we kind of have a natural understanding of that concept in a way.
One thing that I think is that I don't know. I just reminded me of this, but the being around people and a lot, like I think you said, the one couple that was married 60 years, the man said he felt like he was married to 8 different women. Um, and that reminds me of a poem that my uncle told me about. It's called, I think it's called Middle Aged Woman by David White. I'm Googling it. Woman, David White. And that's White. Yeah. And it basically talks about basically saying that he's in this poem, he still sees the middle-aged woman, even though that she's disappeared a lot more than how she used to be noticed, and like the different phases of life and how much she's changed. But allowing the point was allowing your friends to change,
Yeah.
because and your
Yeah.
family, allowing your family and friends to change, and kind of like we said, sometimes you get stuck in certain roles, and it's a good thing because you know how to act, but also allowing others to change and not force them into a certain role. And like, you can't do that. You're not smart. Or like, you can't, you're this is what I know you as. And I guess it kind of goes down to people don't like not liking change. And whenever people change, people have to use effort to reconfigure an accurate representation of who that person is. And that's complicated and it requires effort. Um, and it breaks the status quo. But allowing people to change is a can be a good thing, especially if it's a long time friendship. people are going to have different experiences and ideas, and people that they've interacted with that are going to change some of the things that and they're not going to be the same person you were, and
Yeah,
allowing people to do that. But at the same time, if they change for the worse,
right.
you perceive that you can remind them, hey, this is who you were, and bring them back to, or that there's a balance of like allowing people to change and wanting them to change in a positive direction. And then whenever people change in a negative direction based off of how you see the negative, that you can remind them and say, hey, I think you're this and this and this um, because you still have that in you, like your collection of your old previous selves to a degree.
Yeah, I think it ties really well into the advice my mom always gave me of, you kind of got to choose if you grow together or grow apart. And that's such good advice. Like it's such a simple statement, but that's what she said to me so many times is ultimately you've got to decide, are you growing together or are you growing apart? And in some friendships, it's like I've lived this, you just grow apart and it just happens and it's a natural part of life and it's sad. Um, and in other friendships, the relationship just changes. Like the relationship I have with my best friend from high school now looks a lot different than it did when we were in high school every single day together. And now we live in different states across the country. And but there's still an element of like this the steadfast element is still there. It's just different now. And I think it's just a lot of that change can be uncomfortable and sometimes like it's like, oh yeah, I remember when we used to do this. And I think there has to be this certain level of acceptance of that change of like, yes, that's how it was. That's not how it is now. And it's not realistic to expect that how it is now is how it's going to be moving forward either.
Because I think I think to me it comes back to also like the investment. So you've made a lot of investments when you're younger, and now you're kind of riding it out, but you're not really making any deposits of doing new things. You're just constantly reflecting on the past and saying, "Oh, remember when we did this, and then we did this, and we did." So your relationship with this person is very past oriented and past centered, instead of saying, we could do this in the future. Let's plan for this trip. This would be really fun bonding experience to keep, or like to add some more things to our relationship and have new experiences that we can talk about and share. Um, so I think that's kind of a cool way to look at it too. Is whenever I notice maybe a friendship that's um, maybe I haven't seen in a while. It's you can put work into things and invest in relationships and keep them alive. And if you want, and about keeping them alive, I think to me, keeping a friendship alive, it doesn't take much more than a phone call. At least for me, I always enjoy calling people up and saying, just catching up.
And I think that very well may be. I think then it just gets into the hierarchies of friendship and like some people you're just, some people you consider like your best friend or very close friends at different phases in life no longer are that. That doesn't mean that you can't still have that phone call and kind of catch up, but it also, for me at least, I'm also like, I don't consider you kind of my inner circle anymore, which is challenging and can sometimes be a confronting reality, just this nature of change. But I think it's really important. What I've had to do is just kind of find peace with that. And also just like, yeah, maybe it's not reasonable that everybody from every phase of our life makes it to the next one,
Yeah.
which is tough because like there are people that I haven't spoken to now in years that at the time I thought I'll never not be, friends with this person. And it's not to say that we aren't friends, like we are friends on Facebook and whatever that means, but like I don't really know what's going on in their life. Um, and I've been thinking about this a lot, like, and it's weird because I feel like I have this skewed perception of time, and I was like, oh wait, wow, that was 5 years ago. That wasn't just last year. That was 5 years ago, and reminding myself of that. But I think a lot of it just comes back to, and I'm not saying that you have to be like a pushover and take it, but I think a lot of it is actually acceptance. And you can't have infinite deep relationships. Like you just, that becomes way more competing resources than I think is, reasonable to handle. And if you So then you have to start deciding like who makes it people who now we have more shared interests and common interests and now we're closer because we lived through this together, or people who are from the past that now we don't really have that much in common, but I could still pick up the phone and be like, "Hey, I know it's been 4 years, but what's up?"
Hmm.
But I don't know if that necessarily for me qualifies as like a friendship.
Yeah.
I think you've got to figure out also what are you defining as friendship. And for me, like true friendship in the sense I'm thinking of is a much deeper relationship and connection. Um,
Acquaintanceship.
yeah, but it's hard because you're like, man, I never thought we would get to this point, but here we are. And it's not but also like not defining it. Like it's not a bad thing. It's not a I failed or you failed. It's just a we went to college in different states and you stop spending so much time together. Like, right? It's really easy to be really close to someone when you see them every single day and you're with them from 6:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then you're with them on the weekends. Like, yeah, it's easy to be close then. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's
Mm. It's
like
cool.
being careful with how you
I think it's a good thing because I know we talked about we like the idea of personal growth and like things getting big, like better and better and building off of things. But reality is, you have to things fall apart, and you have to regrow new things and rebuild over and over again.
yeah.
And people in your life for a season, and I think that also makes me. I think like we said a little bit, just just being something being absent and then being brought back in really provides that gratitude, so that the abstinence or that fasting or that lack of really makes you grateful for what you have and what you had. So the impermanence of things is a good thing in a way, because you recognize it just makes things more um, it's more appreciative when you know that things don't last.
And I think too, yes, I think that's something you just to make it through, you have to kind of make your peace with. But I think too, you kind of have to like take a step back and say, okay, well, here are the options. Either we live a static life and nothing changes, or you're gonna invite that room for growth and for change and for, any loss and pain that might come with that, but also excitement, right? Like I didn't know people that I would meet when I graduated high school. And now I'm like, oh wow, these are huge parts of my life. And maybe even a little bit more stable since I think we're now more in ourselves. Um, but maybe not. Maybe I'll be watching this in 20 years and be like, haha, you were wrong about that too, Ashley.
I I think one thing just from moving back, so living in Austin and moving back, I've noticed that being around family has been really great, because being in Austin for 9 months or so, I think also being relatively on my own, it's you, it's really it's easier to get lost in who you are based off of the people you surround yourself with, and the just the culture in general of being, and also living in a city, so you kind of get swept up a little bit more in the ethos of the city. And moving back has been really nice because it's kind of like been the reminders of like, you know kind of fitting back into more of the role that I was in my family, and that was really nice. It's been really great. And so it's and and being able to make friends in a state of mind where you don't really feel like super at ease or comfortable, because I was just pushing myself a lot in Austin to get out of my comfort zone, but it was so much where I didn't feel as stable and like normal. I didn't feel like it was shaking up a little bit. But then now that I have a good just being around more support with my family and stuff, instead of looking at other people, because I was a borderline at some points in like not survival mode, but just basically I didn't really feel super rested. I didn't really feel like that was my place. I didn't master the terrain. I hadn't put enough time into feeling like I knew what was going on. And so from that, I just was like I was more guarded just naturally in an environment that is unknown. You're going to be more guarded. And but now that I'm in a place that I'm very comfortable in, I'm able to look at people as like a potential a little bit easier, I think, as a potential friend. So everything's a little bit different like lens. And so I can look at people and say like I can be maybe a little bit more open, not because I'm not as guarded. And I can imagine like, okay, see the potential of a friendship in people and like looking at them with that focus in mind and that intention of like this could be a really good friendship. That's a fun way to look at people and like that are strangers instead of looking like, oh gosh, what do they want from me? What are they trying to get out of me? What are they getting at? Taking the initiative to kind of lead the interaction potentially and saying, what's like this could be a great friendship that could last for a year or two or however long. And how can I foster that? What can I do to bring that about? I think that's I just this is a thought that came across today. So I haven't had any time to really implement it. I think I've done it unconsciously in the past, but that's a really fun lens to look at life through and look at people through is not as necessarily as like people that are need to be avoided or people that are trying to get something out of me because it feels draining, but look at them like a potential source of, of great value.
Yeah. Okay, so when you were talking about the family and moving back, I was like, ah, maybe there really isn't a coincidence that family and familiar have the same root. I mean, I think that is something that's really powerful about family is kind of having those relationships. But I think what's also crucial about family and to have healthy relationships, I'm specifically thinking with parents, is that relationship itself has to grow and change. Like parent has to kind of let go a little bit and let child accept more responsibility, and child has to step into that role as more responsible, less dependent on the parent, and kind of the shift in that power dynamic to become more equals instead of still like I'm the parent and you're the child. And I think that as for me at least, like looking at I have such a healthy relationship with my parents, and I think it is because they let me step into that. And so that made me and just a lot of evidence, but just made me realize, oh, my parents actually are really full of a lot of wisdom and are great sources of counsel. And so I still want to go to them in kind of more of that role of I'm asking your advice and I'm asking your opinion, but it doesn't come back as a this is what I'm telling you to do. It's a this is what I think. And
Like a mentor.
yeah, much more mentor and just friends. Like my parents and I are friends. Um which is important, and I think that that transition really needs to happen. And I've seen my friends that that hasn't happened, and it makes for a more strained relationship. But listening to you talk about what you're saying with living in Austin and feeling like survival mode and then feeling kind of like, oh, what does this person want from me? It made me think of I don't know if you've heard of it, I'm sure you have, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, that
Mm.
pyramid that like the bottom one is safety, and then you can really go up to self-actualization if you have everything met. And then you talking about, oh, now seeing it as an opportunity. It's like, yeah, you met that bottom tier or those bottom two tiers. And so now you have more resources to give. Like when
Yeah,
you're already,
I felt like I didn't have as much like
yeah,
s- substance to give.
yeah,
It was so bizarre to me, and it made me really empathize with like you know a lot more people just like the states of mind that you can be in when you don't have support around you are like it's just way harder to live because you're
yeah.
not able to it's just totally different and that kind of blew me away. um it just makes it just yeah you can't take as many risks. I don't think you have to play a lot more safe. It feels like I guess yeah like I said like more of a survival mode of just like I don't really know. And the cultures are different too. So the way people are acting is slightly different. I can't really get as good of a read on people like knowing what's going on because they're just different. Everything's a little different. And so yeah, it's interesting.
I love thinking about kind of what you have to give and what you have to offer and all of that just in terms of resources. Like it's like when you don't have basic needs like that met, or you maybe don't have that sense of security and stability and safety and yes, I know what to do, which I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's what happens when you have a drastic change like that. You just don't have as many resources to dedicate to new experiences or forming new relationships because all of your resources, right? You have a finite number of resources, kind of like the life is a pie chart that we've talked about, or that analogy that I've shared with you. I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast before, but totally love the life as a pie chart. And like the pie can't just keep infinitely expanding. And so you've got to figure out how you're going to divvy it up and what goes where. And if you are even starting from a lower source of resources or having to even think about things like, oh, where's the grocery store that I'm going to go to, like little things like that that end up surmounting to be a lot, um it becomes harder to dedicate resources to other things because more of that pie chart is going to basic needs and survival. And I just love that analogy and kind of like frontal lobe is depleted, man, and when frontal lobe is depleted, there's not a lot left. And that's why like executive functioning can get harder. And
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
so I
It's,
always kind of like I think a good check-in is always like, how many resources do I have? Like free resources in terms of like everything isn't strapped with, okay, I've got to do this and this and this, and the pie chart is totally full and I have nothing, I have no more room in my pie chart. And then also sitting down and kind of like evaluating where could I shift things around? Like where could something from this piece
and
go?
I think that's why it's so important to be in a community because a lot of that happens naturally just by being around a community that you trust because just the way things bounce around and responsibilities are shared and there's a common goal. A lot of that stuff happens naturally.
Yep.
Yeah,
And you
it's
know what to expect, you know how people are going to act.
yeah, and I think that's one thing I learned also. Just being more not plugged into a community. I mean, I've plugged myself into communities, but like you said, like it's not. It requires time to build friendships, and even if you're a part of a community, you don't really know anybody that well because you've only been together for a month or two or three. And so yeah, like you said, you don't really know exactly where to put your resources, and it's uh, um, a negative feedback. Oh, I guess positive feedback loop technically, but it's a negative positive feedback loop where uh, if you catch my drift, a positive feedback loop means it gets bigger and bigger, but it's a not good of um, like when you don't have as much energy to give, you can't take as many risks to meet new people or whatever you're trying to do, which then makes it even you have to spend even more resources to kind of maintain something. And next thing you know, you're more isolated than you were before, and now you feel like you're going to be a burden to people, and then that makes you not want to reach out because you are a little bit harder to. You're not as easy. It's not as easy for others to bring you in because you have some needs that haven't been met, and then um, it can be just a bit like a downward spiral. Um, and I've interacted with people in Austin and just seen, I've felt like that at times where, um, well, this is slightly different than what I just said, but basically at the beginning of going to the dance hall, I was like, oh, I'm going to feel so much embarrassment and humiliation going to this. And then that would make me want to stay inside. And if I kept doing that, then it would just get worse. And then
Oh yeah.
I'd build up a monster in my head that's just not really real.
Like fear
Because
really preys on itself. Fear
yeah,
is,
and then just like the fear grows and grows, and that's
yeah.
happened in other aspects of my life, which has been frustrating. Um, but in this one, in case, I was just like, well, I'm just gonna go, and it was so bad. But then just the more I did it, the less it went away. Um,
Yeah. Well, right, it goes back to the data collection of showing yourself like, "Oh, hey, yeah, that it was fine. I survived." And even those awkward, weird moments, it was okay. And I think so much of that is kind of showing yourself like actually, I just as I said that fear kind of preying on itself, I had this thought of this just happened in my head. I've never had this thought before, but like fear is such a predator and a prey all at once. And it's like this predator that feeds off of its own self, which I think makes fear really challenging. And then being able to intercept it. And I think a lot of that comes from like showing yourself that either it is okay or just drawing on past experiences like, yeah, but that's probably not going to happen, or it's not super likely, which, our brain loves to fixate on the like point oh 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 oh, or at least mine does, 1% chance that something's going to happen, and I'm like, yeah, but every other night this hasn't happened,
I
so
think,
it's probably not going to.
yeah, I think this showing the evidence is a pretty powerful thing. And in that way, because we all tell ourselves stories, and then having others, and that's why I think it's important to have others because they can, a lot of times for me personally, I only really get into this like tell myself negative stories, whatever it's about, when I'm alone.
Yes,
So
totally.
whenever you get isolated, your mind starts running through, and you need other people to remind you that that's not accurate. There's no evidence to support that lie that you're telling yourself.
Right.
There's no evidence, and there's evidence to the contrary, actually. And then like having people remind you, I guess that's what positive affirmations are, is that's the point. And you're reminding yourself, even though if you're surrounded in a community of people that were positive and good for you, then they would be doing that for you and you'd be doing that for them. Because it's always easier to take care of others than yourself. So,
Totally.
but I just watched Dune actually, the movie. It's based off of the book. It's like a classic cult classic book that started a lot of the sci-fi stuff. But in the movie, which is a pretty good movie, it's 2 hours 30 minutes long, but it felt really quick. Um, they had a litany against fear, and
Ooh.
I'll read it right now. So it goes like this: I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. So, I like the fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. Like just it's little, and then it grows, and then there's comic books about it, like Green Lantern and lots of little stuff like that.
and and the more it's like not challenged, the more it grows. Like if you have a specific fear and you keep not challenging it, it just wells. But I think that that can be really important, even though it might be uncomfortable sharing some of those things with somebody else. And that's why I think it is really important to have, even if it's just one friend that you can share those things with, that can help point out like, hey, maybe that's a fallacy, like maybe that's not an actually true thought, or what evidence do you have that supports that thought? And I love doing that with myself and with other people. um and then also making sure the evidence you use is quality evidence, not like,
Yeah, yeah.
well, this one thing happened this one time, and you're like, right, that was one day out of how many of your existence, like, so maybe that's not really a great representation, even though we tend to fixate on those things. So I think a lot of it is, I think it's helpful to talk through things with people, but it can be challenging to be transparent and vulnerable about those fears. So it's kind of this catch 22 that you can get stuck in. But what I was going to also say about what you were saying with Austin is I think it's also really draining, like not knowing what your role is and not knowing how to interact in a community. Like with your family, now that you're back in Charlotte, you're like, oh, I know how to act. I know these people. And when you don't know what to do, it's really hard. I've kind of experienced that a little bit stepping into this middle school teaching job. Like, what really is my role, and what do I need to do, and what's my ultimate goal at the end of the day here, and how do I do that, and how do I, set boundaries, but also remember what are these kids capable of, what are they not capable of, just in terms of development, psychologically, educationally, etc. And it's hard when you step into a role where you have very little training to prepare you for that role.
Hmm. We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And you had no training, so you have to learn it on the spot.
And I'm still rising.
Yeah,
um,
that's tough. The role, it's all about the roles and goals. That's one of the best teachers. He's at 10th Planet in Austin. Cody Hofstadter, I think is the last name. But he's probably he's been probably one of my favorite teachers just because he's so philosophically minded. I don't think he's not the best jujitsu practitioner at the gym, but I think he's the best teacher because he breaks everything down into like he goes to the bedrock philosophy of a lot of things, and he would always talk about like the essentials of what you actually like basically the fundamentals of the
Mhm.
sport, and then also like the mind the mental uh, the mindset that you need to be successful as well. So it's not just the moves, it's also the mindset. And he's like, you need to know your roles and your goals. What are you going for? What are you trying to achieve? And get a structured hierarchy in your mind of what you're trying to hit.
Yep.
And from that, you will develop the roles that you need to get there. And yeah, it's tough when you don't know. Yeah, when it's more ambiguous. But I guess that's when you have to just decide to try to pick a role and see if it works. I guess I don't know.
Yeah. I'm just now going back to and kind of fixating on the relationship stuff we started out with. I don't know why my mind just jumped back there, but thinking about like how you establish those relationships and relationships that are, going to continue for a really long time as opposed to those that are maybe really strong but then kind of fizzle out.
And also, what about friendships? So when you have, I'm just thinking from the experience that I've had with like my parents and just different couples. When you have kids, you're just basically driven to the max, and you have to prioritize. And most people prioritize their kids for good reason. And so you basically lose a lot of, not always, but the social life usually drops drastically when you have kids because it's pretty clear what your priorities are. And but after the fact, where do you try to? And then it takes a lot of effort to reinvest and try to find friends that you want to be with, and then it's just a lot of effort, and everybody's at different stages in life, like we said, um, and at different levels of life. Usually the more responsibilities you accrue, the less time that you have, the precious time you have to invest in new friendships, and that's an interesting thing too about what our friendships look like at different phases in life, and it's and I think just developmentally, I think at the beginning of our lives we're much more so like friendships oriented of like our peers, like in middle school and high school and college. It's like very friend oriented oftentimes. And then like when you're older, like what does that look like? Because I feel like your main friends you're not gonna have as many friendships because the ones you do have are probably gonna be deep. It's probably gonna be family. Like I'm thinking, you know, your your wife whenever you're really old, and then your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids or whatever, and then what do you have any other friends? What does that look like in other areas, and how does that blend into things? I just
Well, my grandma says she has been very adamant about this with me, and she says you've got to have friends because your friends sustain you, because you can have relationships with friends that you can't necessarily have with your family, and friends can be an outlet in a way from your family when you need it. And so she has been adamant that you can't rely on your family and especially your spouse for everything,
balance it out.
which I think is quality advice. And she really told me, she was like, you've got to make sure that you prioritize at least 2 or 3 friendships to maintain, because she says that's what keeps her going in a lot of harder moments, and having quality friends that she can lean on and have kind of that external relationship. That she said it's also important, like not that they can't be your spouse's friends too, but that it's important to have your friends,
Hmm.
because she said otherwise you can risk it getting way too messy, and then who do you trust? Like, are they going to run and say something? And But she has always been very explicit with me that friends sustain you and that friendship needs to be a priority, even when it's hard.
Mm.
Which 76 years, I'm like, all right, sure, whatever you say.
Yeah. There's something to say that about life experience. It doesn't always relate to wisdom, as you know. There's lots of people that are old that have never grown up. Um, I met several people. One coworker that was like 42, 41, and he acted like a teenager. I couldn't believe it. That was a realization I had. I was like, whoa, you people don't grow up. You don't have to grow up. It's a choice. Um, and
Yeah.
then some societies and cultures are better at catalyzing the stage of youth to adulthood. You know, at to kind of switch people out of that role and then move them into the next one. I think that's actually something that I've heard from several people about the American culture doesn't do great at is specifically with men. Apparently, in a lot of cultures, they would have a significant moment where you would be considered a man. So you'd move from boyhood, adolescence, something like a ritual or something would happen that would catalyze you into being a
Yeah.
part of being a man. And um, I guess like the Jews have the bar mitzvah or bet mitzvah, or I don't know, whatever one. I guess it's a example. And then like the certain Indian traditions, you go out or like Aborigine or whatever, you go out in the desert for a week and you have to kill something, and you're like where you actually have a test, and it
Yeah.
changes you, you know. So um, I think that's could also help, but just the age differential is usually pretty good. You know, people have been around long enough and seen enough life to recognize some of these patterns and seeing people and how they interact to be able and seeing how things play out over time and be able to give that information to the youth if they're willing to if they're ready to listen to it is a pretty cool thing.
That's the thing too. We have to be receptive. Um, do you want to take a quick break?
Absolutely.
Okay.